A quick flashback. So when I preached my first sermon ever a couple of years ago, it was a very short sermon. It lasted only about 6 to 7 minutes. And when I look back, I wouldn't say that the sermon lasted that long because it was straight to the point and precise. It's because I actually ran out of words to say. So hi, welcome back to The Faith Perspective. My name is Sanford Jerry, and today I want to share a few things that have helped me in terms of my preaching as a result of preaching with notes. The scenario that I just gave really happened when I first preached my first sermon back in the day. I wasn't even a seminary student. I was just a youth. I was given an opportunity on Youth Day to share a sermon, and I did prepare, read a lot of books, and the scripture passage I remember correctly was Romans chapter 12 verse 1 and 2, which talks about the renewing of the mind and the offering of our bodies as living sacrifices. It was a youth day, so I had to encourage the youth to renew their minds. And so after reading quite a lot, my mind was prepared and so on. And so the Sunday came, I mounted the pulpit and I began to preach. And the worst happened. I think that I forgot all the points that I had at the back of my mind. Not because I didn't study, but because I had nothing to remind me. And this brings me to the point where I said, is there anything that I can do to improve on my preaching? And just the idea of having to preach with notes was dreadful for me. I always thought preaching with a bunch of papers in front of the church, that would be destructive to me. I am young. I can remember everything that I will study. I can remember all my points and all that. But the worst happened on that day, and so over the coming years, I started developing a habit, or rather a discipline of writing my sermons. And so I would handwrite my sermons and preach from those notes. They would be right in front of me on the pulpit, and I found that very helpful even as the years went on. When I acquired my first computer, I would type my sermon, print it out, but it didn't just go straight into me printing out my sermons or writing out my sermons. There was a time when I would actually go with a tiny outline of the sermon, and then I would talk. When it's time to go to the next point, I would look at the small outline. But that also proved to be very destructive to me, and it worked to my disadvantage because I usually forgot the things that I needed to say. So this brings me to the main point of making this video. The fact that it worked to my advantage, and I know it could work for the advantage of somebody out there who would be in my place and is starting out in preaching and usually forgets what it is they want to talk about. Because the danger in that also would be that you'll be going all over the place and forgetting what it is that you need actually to talk about. So here's tip number 1. Preaching with notes. Preaching with notes helps you to stay organized. You don't let your thoughts or your words be so many and be pointless. You don't go all over the place. You remain organized and you remain logical. The worst thing you can do is when you have grabbed the attention of your listeners and then you move out of the topic because you can't really follow through an organized pattern of thought, and that usually happens. I know that there are some preachers who are very experienced, not like on my level. There are preachers that are very experienced, more than I am. People that have preached for a very long time, who've been in this ministry for a long time, they are able to preach without notes. They're able to remember clearly, and they're able to stay organized even as they preach. But if you are starting out, I would seriously encourage you to write down your sermon. You don't want to lose the people as a result of you going all over the place and not sticking to what you're supposed to say, especially sticking to the text of scripture. So notes do help you to be organized. So the second thing that notes help you to do is they help you not to stress a lot about trying to remember what you are supposed to say. And in fact, what causes problems usually for people is when they forget what they actually need to say when they start preaching. So when you have notes before you can't really forget. It's like when you try to stray away or forget, you just look down and lo and behold, before you is the manuscript. You just turn the pages and you find what it is that you need to speak about. The temptation, the stress really comes in when you try so hard to remember, and then you would start filling the sermon with stories, you start filling the sermon with jokes, you start filling the sermon with all sorts of things, just for you to try and remember, so you can get back to the main point that you wanted to say. But if you have notes before you, that stress is at least taken away. You don't need to strive to remember what you're supposed to say. That is the second thing. The third thing that having to preach with notes helps you with is being clear and precise. So clarity also is a skill that is gained through consistent preaching, consistent sharing, and all that. But at the end of the day, when you have notes, it helps you to say exactly what you need to say. You don't need to say something else in replacement. It helps you to say exactly what you need to say, and it will help you to say it as clearly as you possibly can, because you've put a lot of thought, you've put a lot of work into writing that sermon. You have used appropriate language that is clear for your audience to hear and follow along. And so you won't struggle like, oh, what words am I going to use? How am I going to put out this sentence and all that? You just look at your manuscript and you will discover that, oh, there it is. I am going to read it out or say it out exactly as it is. And this has helped me in the sense that I've also developed the habit of writing my sermons like word for word. The same way I would say it is the same way that I will write it on the manuscript, so that even when I'm reading from the manuscript directly, I'm not like straying away from what I would typically say if I wasn't reading, if that makes sense. So it's like I'm reading exactly what I would say. So I usually write my sermons word for word, the same way that I would say it. I don't know what word they use. Is it verbatim? Something like that. So that's the third. Preaching with notes really helps you to maintain yourself. Like you don't really need to be anxious. Like, what am I going to say? How am I going to move from this point to the other, and all that kind of stuff that would come in as you're standing in front of the people. For me, it really helped me because I really struggled with stage fright, and if you have that huge amount of stage fright, it's very easy to forget what you actually need to say, because at that time you are trying to compose yourself. You're trying to compose yourself, and then if you don't have something to remind you of what you're supposed to say, you are doomed. You are really doomed. So those are some of the advantages that I've found, and of course these are only 4. I'll share some other advantages that I've seen in preaching with notes in the next video. So be sure to subscribe and hit the like button, follow YouTube, Facebook, everything. Just follow. That gives me the confidence to continue making more videos. And so before I go, I'll share another experience that happened. So even when I'm sharing these tips on why it's important to have notes printed out, I'll tell you that it's equally important to memorize as much as you can the sermon manuscript, because stuff happens. I remember one day, this is another true story. I remember one day I preached at the church that had no roof, and I was busy preaching, and before I hit midway into the sermon, there was a wind and it blew off my sermon from the pulpit. And so I continued speaking because I had memorized much of the sermon. I continued preaching, and some of the ushers and deacons were picking up my sermon manuscript. Imagine if I hadn't completely memorized that manuscript, it would have been hard. So by the time they were bringing back the papers to the pulpit, and I had my phone sit on top of that manuscript, I had already gone a little bit further, and I knew exactly where I was, and I just flipped there, went to the exact page, and continued with my sermon. So even when I'm sharing this, I'm not saying that people should not completely memorize this. They just write down their sermons and go with the papers everywhere. No, I'm saying it is equally important to also, memorize the sermon, and if possible, preach it to somebody before you deliver it to your church or to the place where you're going to preach it to. So in my case, my wife is my first listener. She listens to the sermon before I preach it, and that does help me. If there are any places where my thought wasn't straight, she would be like, oh, what's that? What did you say? What do you mean by that? Maybe the average person would not be able to understand that. Can you simplify it? So I'm able to do that because somebody else went through it, and they listened to it before I delivered it to the people. And so that's pretty much it. I hope that you join me again, even as I share more tips in the next video. God bless you.